Welcome to Le Podcast to Philip, everyone. Today, we're going deep on a story that's got everyone talking, and everyone. Elon Musk and his organization Doge now have access to the U.S. Treasury payment system.
Wow.
Yeah,
Big stuff.
trillions of dollars, federal funds,
Security.
everything flows through this system, and we're going to try to figure out how this happened,
Okay.
why Musk made this move, and what this means for the American people. We got a bunch of news articles and an interesting analysis from a Democracy Now! Episode to help us with this.
Well, I think the first thing we should do is be clear about what this access actually means.
Okay, yeah.
Because it doesn't necessarily mean that they have, people's social security numbers.
Right.
It's not like that. But it is this incredibly complex system. It manages all that money you were talking about. Trillions of dollars.
Yeah.
Huge programs like Social Security.
Yeah.
And this access, well, it gives them a lot of insight and potentially a lot of control over how that money moves around.
That is kind of concerning, right? I mean, like, when you think about it, this access was given despite some high-ranking Treasury officials raising some serious objections.
Exactly.
And then you hear that some of those officials were actually forced out of their position.
Yeah, it does make you wonder.
It really does.
Yeah.
And then you got Senator Ron Wyden, who actually sent a letter directly to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. He laid out all his concerns in black and white, about potential political interference, and just the fact that this whole thing reeks of conflicts of interest.
And what this all boils down to is state capture. This idea that private individuals or corporations can have too much sway over government decisions and institutions. Now imagine if this was happening, but instead of Musk, it was a foreign entity.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone would be calling it state capture.
No.
And condemning it.
Yeah, of course. We'd be all over it. And it's interesting because this all ties into this bigger tension that we've been seeing between the Trump administration and certain government agencies. I mean, think about the whole thing with the USAID security officials.
Right.
Those who refused to give Musk's team access to classified documents.
Yeah.
They ended up suspended.
And we can't forget how openly critical Musk has been of these very agencies.
He's not shy about his feelings, that's for sure.
No. USA specifically, accusing them of illegal practices and just being completely inefficient. He's even gone so far as to call for USA to be completely dismantled.
Wow.
So this is the backdrop we have to consider.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's crucial to understanding what Musk's intentions might be and what the consequences of his growing influence on government operations could be.
All right, so to really get a handle on the potential consequences of all this, we need to talk about this episode of Democracy Now! They had two guests, Weed Shahid, who's a Democratic strategist,
Right.
and then Lindsay Owens, the executive director of the Groundwork Collaborative.
Interesting.
Now, Shahid uses a pretty strong word to describe all this. He calls it a coup. I mean, he's basically saying that Musk is using all his wealth and influence to take control of a vital government system.
Yeah, and he even goes on to say that if this were happening in another country, the U.S. would be the first to call it out as a blatant attempt at state capture.
Right. But then you've got Owens, who brings up a totally different set of concerns.
Okay.
She's really worried about the lack of transparency and oversight around what Doge is actually doing. She's basically afraid that taxpayer data could be misused.
Right.
And that Musk might even be trying to use this access to enrich himself.
So we've got this situation with some potentially huge consequences, but we still don't know for sure what Musk's endgame is.
Exactly. It's all very mysterious.
Well, let's look at what the source material tells us about his possible motives.
Okay, let's do it.
One theory is that Musk wants to get around all those legal roadblocks that have prevented him from making the spending cuts he wants.
I see where you're going with this.
Do you remember all those attempts to stop federal payments?
Oh, yeah. How could I forget?
Yeah.
That was a whole mess. It took court intervention to even sort it out.
Exactly.
Oh.
So this access to the Treasury system, well, it could be a way for him to bypass all that legal red tape and just get what he wants, push his own agenda forward.
That's pretty alarming when you think about it that way.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, that is definitely alarming. I mean, are there other theories about his motivation?
Well, there's this whole other angle that's even scarier. It could be some kind of cyber attack. Think about it. Musk is partnered with companies like Visa, and he's even talked about building his own payment system. So getting his hands on Treasury data, that's like a treasure trove of information for him. It's possible he's after sensitive data, maybe even Social Security numbers.
I mean, that's terrifying. I guess what you're saying is power, data, maybe even money. They could all be motivating factors here.
Absolutely. And some people think Musk might be trying to gain control over government funds, to divert them toward projects or companies he likes or that benefit him in some way. And given how much money we're talking about and how relentless he is when it comes to his businesses, well, it's not a theory we can just dismiss.
And we can't forget about the tax cuts that keep getting brought up,
Yeah.
the ones that would mostly help the wealthy. Could this whole thing be tied to that?
It's possible. Some people see Doge as a way to find places to cut the budget, maybe to pay for those tax cuts, basically shifting the cost onto everyday Americans. It raises some serious questions about fairness and what could happen to those really important social programs.
So Shahid is pretty fired up about this whole situation. He's not just raising concerns, he's actually calling for action. What does he want people to do?
He's urging everyone to get in touch with their senators and demand a full-blown investigation into what Musk is doing. He thinks the Democratic Party needs to take a much stronger stand against what he sees as a blatant power grab.
I mean, this whole thing feels like we're in uncharted territory. It's hard to even wrap your head around what the consequences might be. What do you think the long-term impact of Musk having access to the Treasury system could be?
Well, if no one stops him, the consequences for our democracy and our economy could be massive. I mean, just imagine the potential for manipulation, steering money to the projects or people he favors, undermining any institution that dares to challenge him. It really makes you think about transparency and accountability and how much influence wealth should have in our political system.
This whole conversation is making me think about the bigger picture. The power dynamics in our society, not just in this particular case. We're seeing these tech billionaires with more and more power. The lines between government and private companies are blurring, and people are losing trust in the institutions that are supposed to protect them.
Yeah, you're right. It's like a perfect storm. And what Musk is doing, whether he means to or not, it plays right into all those fears and anxieties.
Yeah.
It makes us ask some hard questions about who really holds the power in our society.
Yeah, it's like a real-life cautionary tale. Even in a democracy as strong as the U.S., there are still weak spots, places where things can go wrong.
Exactly. And it shows just how important it is to be vigilant, to stay informed, and to hold those in power accountable, no matter how rich or famous they are.
And that's where what Shahid is saying becomes even more important.
Yeah.
He reminds us that we have a voice and a responsibility to participate in our democracy. Contacting our elected officials and demanding accountability. That's one way to do that.
And this is bigger than just Democrats or Republicans. It's about protecting our institutions, making sure they work for everyone, not just a select few.
If we don't do anything, the consequences could be huge. If we just sit back and let things continue as they are, it could lead to less democratic participation, and people could completely lose faith in our government. It's a scary thought.
And, it really highlights just how important it is to think critically, to question everything, and to really try to understand how these things, technology, the concentration of wealth, how these things are affecting our lives and our democracy.
And we can't just sit back and watch it happen. We have to get involved, ask the tough questions, and demand transparency and accountability from the people in charge.
That's why I think Shahid is spot on when he tells people to get in touch with their senators, demand an investigation.
Right.
Have those difficult conversations. It's how we protect our democracy.
This isn't about being against Musk or about Democrats versus Republicans. It's about making sure our institutions are strong and independent and that they work for everyone.
Yeah, it's about understanding that all this rapid technological change and the fact that so much wealth and power is concentrated in the hands of so few people that it's not all good. There's a real risk there, too.
I have to admit, this has been a real eye-opener for me. I hope our listeners are thinking about all this, too.
I hope so, too. Maybe they'll even want to dig a little deeper, do their own research, look at the sources we talked about, and come to their own conclusions.
Yeah, and be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments. We always love to hear what you're thinking. These conversations are so important for a healthy democracy.
Absolutely.
And hey, if you found this deep dive helpful and interesting, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Le Podcast de Philippe on YouTube. We'll have more deep dives for you soon.
We're always digging into the big issues.
This whole thing with Elon Musk and the Treasury system, it makes me wonder about the future. I mean, if someone that rich and powerful can have this much control, what happens to the United States? What happens to our democracy?
I think those are questions we all need to be asking. It makes us think about who we are as a nation, what's important to us, how do we balance individual ambition and technological progress with what's good for everyone.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we'll leave you with one last thought, a question to think about. If things keep going in this direction, If Elon Musk's power keeps growing unchecked, what kind of future are we heading towards? What kind of country will we become?
It's a really important question to consider, and the answers might not be easy, but we have to try to find them.
Thanks for joining us on Le Podcast de Philippe for this deep dive into Elon Musk's controversial access to the U.S. Treasury payment system. Until next time, stay curious, stay involved, and keep asking those hard questions.
And never forget, on se demande si Elon Musk n'est pas en train de faire un coup d'État aux USA.